Most think a food crisis means empty shelves, but 2026 has taught us it's subtler. It's the disappearing depth. Fewer brands, shrinking sizes, and surging prices. For those of us in quiet suburbs, waiting for a crisis is a luxury we can't afford. It's time to prepare quietly, while the aisles are still open. 11. Eggs used to symbolize stability on the American dinner table. But moving into 2026, they've quietly become something else entirely. An early warning system for how fragile modern supply chains have become. This year, egg prices across multiple states started swinging sharply once again. Not only because of continuing avian flu outbreaks, but also because feed costs, fuel prices, refrigeration expenses, and transportation delays all increased at the same time. The system wasn't built for repeated stress like this. It was built for efficiency. And that's the part most shoppers still don't fully see. Several major grocery chains quietly reintroduced purchase limits or removed promotional discounts altogether to slow demand without triggering panic. If you walk into a store and notice egg cartons spread farther apart, fewer familiar brands, or partially filled shelves that somehow still look normal, that's usually a sign of reduced redundancy inside the supply system. The shelves appear full, but the backup inventory behind them is getting thinner. Modern supermarkets now operate on just-in-time logistics. In many cases, stores only carry a few days' worth of eggs at a time. If delivery trucks are delayed even 24 hours, the safety buffer can disappear almost immediately. And what customers see in the morning is often carefully staged by employees spreading inventory across the shelf to preserve the illusion of abundance. For older Americans living in suburbs or small towns, this matters more than many people realize. Eggs are not just breakfast food, they are one of the cheapest and easiest complete proteins available. During power outages, illness, winter storms, or periods of physical exhaustion, soft high-protein foods become extremely valuable, especially for seniors who may not have the energy, mobility, or health to cook complicated meals every day. And while fresh eggs are still available in most areas, the quiet shortage is already happening elsewhere. Powdered eggs and shelf-stable egg products are becoming harder to find because experienced preppers began buying them long before the public noticed supply pressure building. Some long-term powdered egg products can remain usable for close to a decade when stored correctly. That makes them one of the most quietly strategic foods in modern preparedness. And that leads to the real lesson of 2026. Modern shortages rarely begin with dramatic empty shelves overnight. They begin with slightly higher prices, slightly fewer options, slightly slower restocking, until one day the pressure becomes too obvious for anyone to ignore. 10. Rice has quietly become one of the most important preparedness foods in America, even though most people still think of it as something ordinary sitting at the bottom shelf of a grocery store. But over the last few years, global rice markets have become far more unstable than most families realize. Export restrictions from major producing countries, rising fertilizer costs, drought conditions, and shipping disruptions have all started squeezing supply at the same time. And when that happens, the first thing stores do is not empty the shelves. They reduce inventory depth behind the scenes. That's why many shoppers walk into stores today and still see rice available, but fewer brands, smaller bags, and higher prices. The real warning sign is not disappearance, it's reduced redundancy. At one point, India temporarily restricted certain rice exports while supplying roughly 40% of the global rice trade. A single policy decision thousands of miles away immediately affected pricing across American supermarkets. For older Americans living in suburban homes or small towns, rice matters because it solves several problems at once. It stores easily, it cooks into soft meals that are easier on digestion, and during power disruptions or financial stress, it stretches expensive proteins much further. A small amount of chicken, soup, or canned meat becomes multiple meals when paired with rice. What most people don't realize is how cost-efficient rice still is compared to nearly every other calorie source in the store. Even after inflation, large bags can provide hundreds of servings at a fraction of the cost of processed foods. And when sealed correctly in simple food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers, white rice can remain usable for decades. That's why experienced preppers are not panic buying rice. They're slowly adding an extra bag while it's still affordable and easy to find. Because once shortages become obvious to everyone else, the calm buying phase is already over. 9. Canned meat. Canned meat is one of those foods most people ignore until prices suddenly jump or shelves start looking thinner than usual. And over the last few years, that shift has already started happening quietly across America. Tuna, canned chicken, Spam, corned beef. Many of these products have become noticeably more expensive while package sizes slowly shrink. But the real issue is deeper than inflation. Protein is one of the hardest parts of the food supply chain to stabilize during disruptions. Livestock feed costs have risen sharply. Fuel costs affect refrigerated transportation. Labor shortages continue affecting meat processing facilities across the country. And unlike dry foods, protein systems are much less flexible once production slows down. What most families don't realize is that grocery stores depend heavily on predictable consumer behavior. Stores expect people to buy canned meat occasionally, not all at once. During several recent supply disruptions, some regional warehouses reportedly emptied faster from canned protein products than from bottled water. That surprises many people until they think about it. In stressful situations, calories matter, but protein affects strength, energy, recovery, and even emotional stability far more than most shoppers realize. For older Americans, canned meat becomes especially important because it provides easy nutrition without requiring freezing, complicated preparation, or heavy cooking equipment. During power outages, mobility limitations, or winter storms, opening a can of chicken or tuna may be far more realistic than preparing fresh meat. And here's the part. Experienced preppers understand early. Canned meat is not only survival food, it's continuity food. It allows normal meals to continue longer when systems around you become unreliable. Rice, soup, pasta, and canned vegetables become much more sustaining when even a small amount of protein is added. Most canned meats also last several years when stored in cool conditions. And while shelves still look relatively stable today, availability is tightening quietly in many areas. The people preparing early are not buying pallets. They're simply building depth slowly while options are still available and prices remain somewhat manageable. 8. Cooking oil. Cooking oil is one of the most overlooked foods in modern preparedness. Most people don't think about it until they suddenly can't find the brand they normally buy, or they notice the bottle has become smaller while the price quietly climbs higher every few months. But behind the scenes, cooking oil has become one of the clearest examples of how fragile global food systems really are. Over the last several years, droughts, heat waves, fertilizer shortages, export restrictions, and transportation disruptions have all affected vegetable oil production around the world. Sunflower oil supplies were heavily impacted after the war in Eastern Europe disrupted one of the world's largest agricultural regions. Olive oil prices surged after extreme heat damaged harvests across southern Europe. And even common vegetable oils became more volatile because nearly every part of the system depends on fuel, trucking, packaging, and international shipping working smoothly at the same time. What most people miss is that oil is not just an ingredient, it's stored energy. A single tablespoon contains far more calories than most vegetables, which becomes extremely important during stressful periods when meals become smaller or less balanced. Many emergency nutrition experts quietly point out that fats are often the first thing people underestimate when building food reserves. Without enough fat, energy levels drop faster, meals feel less satisfying, and morale declines sooner than expected. For older Americans living alone or in quiet suburban neighborhoods, cooking oil matters because it keeps simple foods usable. Rice, beans, canned vegetables, and pasta become far more filling and comforting with even a small amount added during cooking. And in long power outages or winter storms, maintaining familiar meals can matter emotionally almost as much as nutritionally. Most unopened oils last around 1 to 2 years when stored away from heat and light. And while shelves still appear stocked today, availability is quietly tightening in some regions as more families slowly build backup supplies without drawing attention. That's the pattern worth noticing. The real shortages usually begin long before people start calling them shortages. 7. Flour is one of those foods that quietly becomes important again whenever people lose confidence in the stability of everyday life. Most Americans stopped thinking much about flour years ago because modern stores made bread permanently available. But during recent disruptions, many families suddenly rediscovered something uncomfortable. Grocery stores are not giant warehouses anymore. They are fast-moving distribution points with surprisingly thin reserves. During the early pandemic shortages, flour sales surged so quickly that some producers struggled to keep shelves stocked for months. Not because America ran out of wheat overnight, but because packaging systems, trucking schedules, and consumer demand all shifted at the same time. Several major flour companies later admitted they had enough raw grain, but not enough small retail packaging capacity to keep up with panic-level demand. That's the kind of hidden weakness most people never see until pressure hits the system. And those pressures have not disappeared. Rising fertilizer prices, drought conditions across key farming regions, fuel costs, and unstable weather patterns continue affecting grain markets around the world. Even small disruptions now ripple through a supply chain built for efficiency instead of resilience. For older Americans living in small towns or suburban neighborhoods, flour matters for a very practical reason. It creates flexibility. Bread, biscuits, pancakes, simple gravies, and basic comfort foods become possible even when grocery trips become harder or more expensive. During stressful periods, familiar homemade foods often help people emotionally as much as physically. What many people overlook is how affordable flour still is compared to heavily processed foods. A single bag can produce dozens of meals for only a few dollars. And when stored correctly in sealed containers away from moisture, white flour can remain usable far longer than most families expect. Experienced preppers understand something simple. Preparedness is not about eating survival rations every day. It's about preserving normal routines for as long as possible. And flour quietly supports that better than most people realize. While shelves still appear stable today, availability is tightening slowly in many regions as more families begin buying extra before the next disruption arrives. 6. Pasta is one of the clearest examples of how normal food quietly turns into preparedness food during uncertain times. Most people see pasta as cheap comfort food, something simple to keep in the pantry for busy nights, but experienced preppers look at it differently. They see dense calories, long shelf life, low cooking complexity, and emotional familiarity all packed into one of the most affordable foods in the store. And lately, the warning signs around pasta have been getting harder to ignore. Over the last few years, wheat harvest problems in North America and Europe, fertilizer shortages, rising diesel costs, and transportation delays have all pushed pasta prices higher. In some stores, customers started noticing fewer varieties long before shelves ever looked empty. That's how modern shortages often begin. Not with disappearance, but with shrinking selection and slower restocking cycles that most shoppers barely pay attention to. Italy, one of the world's largest pasta producers, has faced repeated pressure from drought and extreme heat affecting durum wheat production. What surprises many people is how quickly a climate problem on another continent can quietly affect grocery prices in small American towns thousands of miles away. For older Americans, pasta matters because it's practical in ways people rarely talk about. It cooks quickly, it stores well, it's easy on digestion. And during stressful periods, warm, familiar meals can reduce anxiety far more than most preparedness guides admit. In difficult situations, emotional stability matters too. That's something many people overlook. Preparedness is not only about surviving physically, it's about reducing stress while systems around you become less reliable. Pasta also stretches other foods extremely efficiently. A small amount of canned meat, soup, or vegetables can become several filling meals when combined with it, and unopened dry pasta can remain usable for years when stored in cool, dry conditions. Most people still think shelves look normal, but experienced shoppers notice something different: fewer options, higher prices, smaller inventory depth.